thank you everybody for coming this evening. It's really, really good to see so many people here. We've had a really busy week with Louise Cherrie, who's come from Tasmania to talk to all of us, as many as possible, about salmon farming. She will introduce herself, of course, but she's had a lot of experience of the industry, and this is something that Salmon Free Falklands feels really strongly about. We feel that there's a lot of information that we need to know, all of us we need to know before we can make a decision whether we want it or not. And we feel MLAs have gone out fact-finding. We have to do what we can, so we've brought reports and facts here for everybody to hear. Is Salmon Free Falklands who has invited her. There's a group of us who've contributed to the cost of getting her here. Louise is doing this pro bono. She feels really strongly about this as well. She's had the experience, the lived experience of it, which none of us have. So.
Look, I know some of that is hard to watch, and I do also recognise that some of that is not going to be relevant to what you're facing because your population is so much smaller and those cages may well be put in unpopulated areas. That makes no difference to the disgraceful level of emissions that will occur, and it will make no difference to the economic impacts that you will have arising from the nutrients. So just going back a step and to introduce myself, so see, I was on the Ministerial Advisory Committee. The Marine Farming Review Panel advises Tasmanian ministers about where and how to farm salmon, amongst other aquaculture pursuits. Myself and Professor Novak, she is a world-renowned fish health expert, a biosecurity expert. We were put onto that panel to help them make decisions in a more robust way, given the growing community concern that you saw then. Unfortunately, what we were faced with was what you saw me say, an unwillingness to learn from the lived history in Macquarie Harbour, where we have had widespread measurable environmental harm and a species of skate pushed to the brink of extinction. That's what we're facing now, still. We tried in vain to drive best practice, not immediately. Understand you've got jobs to keep and profits to make and shareholders to satisfy. But what we wanted to see was, let's just ratchet it up every year. Let's get a little bit better so that we can move towards best practice. Having said that, and I hope it's very clear by the end of tonight, that the open pen component of salmon farming can never, ever be considered sustainable nor best practice. It is untreated, unfiltered, nutrient-rich waste being discharged under licence directly into the marine environment with dire and unexpected consequences. So just to be clear about that, open pens are no good. And we're seeing a global move away from that. So try as we would, we couldn't make any headway. We were treated appallingly. Our questions were inconvenient. And as well as being an environment specialist and Professor Novak a specialist, we weren't listened to at all. And I do think when you're considering resigning from something like that, when you're not making headway, and one person on a panel or a board is upset, that might be easy to write off as just that one person. Louise's opinion versus the rest of the specialists. We resigned together, having never met each other before and being so disgusted by what we saw. The reason we resigned was that we were unwilling to put our name to a massive expansion, given that material harm had caused from the industry as it was. Why on earth would we want to double it? So I ended up having to resign. That was a very difficult thing to do. I no longer sit on any government advisory panels or boards. But luckily I work for myself. I'm an independent environmental consultant. And I want to be clear, I am an industry person. I started off reasonably pro-salmon because I believe we need a strong economy. And I understand from the Falklands, the few days I've had here, that you have this real desire for economic diversification. And I understand that. However, the best of intentions can have irreparable consequences, broader than you can ever imagine. So I was a supporter, but economic gain cannot come at the expense of sustainability and our environment. And as you'll see, your wild fisheries and the other economic levers you pull to have the great lifestyle you have here. And it is stunning here. I'm so impressed by what I've seen. I'm so impressed with the people I've spoken to. The level of passion you have for your environment is similar to us. We're islanders, so I understand what you mean when you are, so passionate about where you live. So I can speak out because I'm an independent consultant. And I also want to clarify, I'm usually dressed in high vis. My client base is high industry, heavy industry, high impact. I've got a lot of mining clients. I do a lot of work in manufacturing, ports, logistics, energy. So we have big problems, and my clients are honest about the problems and hire people like me to help them solve them. They don't hide from the truth of their operations and say, like the salmon producers do, nothing to see here, it's okay. So I would also clarify one last thing before I move on to the slides. I've been in the industry nearly 30 years. I have never spoken publicly about any issue. This is the one thing that I can find no justification for this industry to be operating the way it is. And I am speaking out and will continue to speak out. So I really do appreciate Salmon Free Falklands inviting me. They did offer to do a whip round and pay me. I would not take your money, but thank you. I would do this for free, and I'll continue to work pro bono for you as long as you need help to fight this. So I'm just going to run through some stuff. In terms of our similarities, you might have seen from the video some recognisable windy seas and some beautiful coastlines. So in many ways we are the same. We've only got 10 degrees difference in latitude. We're a bit warmer, we're a bit bigger, and we have a bit more unemployment, a lot more unemployment. So our lighthouses are even similar. Thank you for a picture. And we're islanders, and we care. And the British founded us. We're a penal colony. You probably fared better than us. And I just want to clarify something, because by the end of this, you're going to probably see, as one person did raise this week, are you a bunch of idiots down there? How could you let this happen? And look, really fair question, because when I reflect on the last 30 odd years since we started off as a little locally owned, bespoke trial site, if you like, right through to where we are now, how the hell did that happen? That has crept up on us. That is death of 1,000 cuts, and it happens very slowly. I am showing you this because this is the regulatory framework. All of these pieces of legislation under our quite robust resource and planning scheme have been through 2 houses of Parliament, Legislative Committee, and given royal assent. We have an independent regulator appointed by the Governor. So we have the mechanisms by which to do better. And I think by the end of it, you will think, well, what, you don't have any rules? You don't have any people? You don't have any leaders? We do, but I hope by the end of this you'll be able to see why we've ended up where we are. So I'm not going to go through that because that's very boring, but just know there is quite a large framework within which we work and try to do the best we can. So my due diligence findings. So when I joined the panel, it is incumbent upon me to educate myself in order to provide the Minister with the best possible advice to approve or not to approve. Not a lot on this slide. What I found, not only did I already know about massive and widespread environmental harm, I found an absence of a willingness to work with us from industry. So despite, as you've seen in the film, my repeated requests for biogeochemical modelling to tell me the carrying capacity, what are you actually, how many fish is too many? I want to see your plans, because from what I can see, you're just shooting blind and making it up on the run. You cannot lose, you cannot have a mass mortality event and tell me then that you didn't have a plan to deal with those carcasses. So everything I asked for, and Professor Novak, from a biosecurity perspective, we were told, oh, we don't have that, or what we were given was grossly inadequate. Because the industry had been growing under an adaptive management framework. And if you ever see that in a development proposal, I want your alarm bells to start ringing. Adaptive management is for dealing with uncertainty. And there's always a place for that in industry. But what is certain about the salmon industry is you will have biosecurity risks, you will have mass mortalities, you will be discharging nutrients, you will lose marine debris and plastics, and a whole range of other things. These are known characteristics of the operation. You don't adaptively manage those things, you put your plans in place to mitigate those up front. Adaptive management is for a virus you never thought was going to come into the state, and those sorts of things. So adaptive management is a furphy, but I'm a pragmatist, and even though I wasn't happy so far with what I'd seen, I thought, okay, well let me cut you some slack, and I will have a look at how adaptive management has worked to date. And we'd already had Macquarie Harbour with a massive expansions, millions of fish lost. That's a disaster. Show me the worst cage. Okay, that's bad. Now show me what you did to adaptively manage to that. And here's where the industry starts with their classic playbook. I saw our independent regulator write to that industry and tell them that they've breached their permit and they need to destock that cage. I saw the operator write back. And then I saw more and more litigious letters fly back and forth between the independent regulator and the operator, tying that regulator in knots for 8 months, and not a fish was removed from that cage, not one single fish. So that level of disgusting pollution that I saw only got worse. They took the fish out at harvest time because it's convenient to do that. So in that regard, I don't count that to have been a successful example of adaptive management. That's a disgrace. So I was really had nowhere to go but to resign. I certainly couldn't put my business reputation at risk by signing off on that advice that yes, we should expand. And so I resigned. I just want to now explain to you a little bit about the industry itself and the impacts. I know you've seen it, but I also want to show you some things in relation to impacts you might see here. So in terms of the way the Tasmanian system works, I won't labour this, we have marine development plan areas within which will allow you to set up business. Operators will come and apply for a lease, and that was my role, to look at those applications, see if they're okay, and make advice to the Minister. Okay, here's your lease, and then they apply for a licence. So what we have now is a range of aquaculture practices. It's hard to see, but the orange is salmon. We also successfully grow oysters, mussels, and seaweed. And licences, there's a lot of transparency in terms of me finding a licence to operate. I can see the conditions that are being asked of the operator. That's great. We have an amazing spatial system for environmental management in Tasmania. What I can't see, and what is cloak and dagger, is how they're performing against that licence. So the lack of transparency is startling. And the only way we tend to get information is repeated requests for information, and you know that tends to wear community members down. There's a few of us who keep writing anyway, so we're really painful to the rest. In terms of the size of our industry, so I only have 2023 data because the 2024 4 data will only come out in August. So we have a total market production in Tasmania of 74,000 odd head-on gutted fish. That's the one we take to market. That equals, actually, to grow that tonnage, you need to put nearly 100,000 fish in the water. So that's the in-water biomass. I am a little bit confused here about what is actually been asked for. So what I understand is it's a 50,000 tonne industry. Anywhere up to 200,000 tonne, I'm not sure, and I guess until the consultation package comes out, nobody will be. But I've been told two different things about what tonnage it is. I've been told that the 50,000 is the market tonnage, and I've been told it's the in-water biomass. So I don't know. It's an important thing because when you get that consultation material, the in-water is 30% more than you take to market. That's a lot more fish. That's a lot more discharges and emissions. So it is a little thing to watch. 1.3 billion in exports. You know, we've got quite a lot. This is a very similar tonnage to what's being proposed. I think this area, the Don Tricasto, you sort of saw a lot of the underwater footage is from the Don Tricasto. That is pretty much dead. We've lost our scallop fisheries there. We've lost our flathead recreational commercial, and it's a nightmare. That's not too much different than what's being asked for here. I just want to go into the biggest issue with open pen salmon farming is the nitrogen discharges. So the emissions from fish poos and wees, 1s and 2s. To make it easier to understand in our minds, we often think about it as an equivalent to the human population discharge. So for Tasmania, all Tasmanian salmon is, you know, around 4,000 tonnes per year of dissolved inorganic nitrogen. The total sewerage equivalent, so the whole population of Tasmania is only 755. We don't discharge it into the environment, that's just the raw number. So you can see for a whole population of 560,000 people, this industry is massively higher than that. So I hope that makes sense. This is the Falklands. So this number here, 4.9 tonne, is the total Falklands population's nitrogen equivalent sewage discharge. The proposed 50,000, if that's what it is, maybe it's higher, I don't know. 50,000 tonne industry is over 500 times the sewage equivalent of your population. If you think about that in terms of actual people, 50,000 tonnes is equivalent to the sewage of over 2 million people. If that industry goes up to 200,000 tonnes, we're talking about over 8 million people sewage equivalent discharge of nitrogen. So it's a lot. I haven't seen, obviously they haven't put out enough information for me to make any assessment on, but even one pen at 168 metre diameter at a 15 kilo per cubic metre stocking rate, which is pretty standard globally, is equivalent to the discharge of 10,000 people. So it's not a small industry, it's not a small operation, it is an industrial operation, it is a feedlot. And again, I am working off the only things I could find. This was given to me, I believe it's from 2021. Marking out proposed areas, this might change. I want to caveat that this might change, and I'm only working on what I have. So I've ring-fenced where the dotted cages are proposed to go. Again, might change. 3 to 7 kilometres from shore. I don't know if there's room for that. And 2 reticulated aquaculture system hatcheries. You can see in proximity to your very important Laligo fishing zone how close that is. Again, I would reiterate that I don't have too many issues with a well-run RAS hatchery. They can be run okay. I don't have too many issues with the way you can run your ports and servicing. It is that in-net, open pen aspect of the farm that causes all the harm. So, obviously, every industry and every economic pursuit has some impacts, and sometimes we balance them up against the economic return, and sometimes it makes it okay. It's a tolerable impact because, you know, maybe the environment will recover, maybe it won't, but it's so lucrative that we do it anyway, and that happens. So I'm going to run through the economic returns for Tasmania. Less than 1% of people in Tasmania work in salmon. So salmon industry is way down here. And a large majority of those are in the processing plant, which you won't do here. So that is not very good. That when I saw this when I was on the panel, I started to think, well, hang on, we're not adequately offsetting the harm because there's no jobs in this. With regards to the dollar economic return, revenue for the companies has doubled in the last decade. However, taxes have dwindled to nothing for us. Reason being, when we started, this was a locally owned business. Then became a couple of locally owned businesses, who then went into joint venture with overseas entities, who then progressively bought shares and more shares and more shares, until now the situation we're in today is we have 3 companies operating that are owned wholly by foreign investors from Japan, Canada and Brazil. And it's good business to get a good accountant and find your way through paying as little tax as possible. So you can write off tax by doing research and development, that's a tax break, cutting a loss somewhere in your business, that's a tax break. So there's lots of clever accounting ways that you end up paying no tax. Now this is our story, and I'm led to believe, you know, I'm being told constantly this won't happen here. Good. I'm glad for you. This is a precautionary tale, and I'm going to run through some of the tactics used to end up with this disgraceful picture. The licence fees, we don't pay any rates on the water. There is lease fees and licence fees, but there are pittance. No royalties are paid on fish. So please don't think about this as your wild fisheries. Please don't think that because you're happy with the way that's run and you have good economic returns, that model applies to this. It doesn't. It's a totally different industry. It's their fish, they bought it in, they grew it, they'll harvest it. It has nothing to do with you. So you don't get royalties. You will become landowners. That's leaseholders, lessees, leaseors. So by the time we take into account the regulatory effort, government-funded science into trying to understand and address the impacts caused by the industry, we're actually running at a loss. We're not actually getting any economic return. It's costing us money to have our public waterways pillaged and irreparably damaged. And this is the point at which I think somebody had called us a bunch of idiots for letting this happen. I just want to let you know we are a first world country. We have many great scientists, we have many great leaders, but we've ended up here, and I will explain why. So just want to really get into a couple of environmental issues, just so you're fully aware. The threats to the Falkland from this industry are low oxygen, because the nutrients create algae or sediments that are smothered, which start to strip oxygen out of the water column. You have biosecurity risks because you would be importing roe and from farm practices. There is a huge amount of chemicals that go with biosecurity management in an open pen farming operation. You will have escaped carnivorous introduced species, which in Norway certainly has decimated their natural wild population of salmon. Here's where we start to talk about unanticipated or unknown consequences. I can't say, nor can any of us, what the impact of the escaped salmon will be to the Falklands. That's one of those wait and see things. Kelp forests are extremely sensitive to nitrogen and high nutrients, and they get smothered. And you would have seen on the video the diver shaking the kelp. All of that, it looks like dust, I guess. All of that is algae that smothered that and stops it from respiring and thriving. It also coats it, so none of the larvae on species like the largo can settle. So, you know, that's when things start to decline. Antibiotic use, even if they don't use it prophylactically, i.e. all the time in the feed, which some have to, you would definitely have to use it when you have viral outbreaks. And we're detecting it at up to 7 kilometres from the farm in wild fish. So it's not contained to the farm. Algal blooms, red tides, jellyfish, which I'm actually going to go through on the next slide, smothering of your rocky reefs, marine debris, which is a hazard to pilotage, damage to your wild fisheries, both the commercial and recreational, and damage to your brand. And these are what we have found. The only one we haven't had too many problems with is the escaped fish, only because they don't seem to thrive in Tasmanian waters and they don't seem to be able to feed after being habituated to a little pellet being given to them. So we found dead ones with pebbles in their gut, trying to feed themselves on anything little and round.
Doesn't look like there's anything to eat that.
What's that?
Doesn't look like there's anything to eat that, to be fair.
Oh yeah. Oh yes, and we trashed that. So yeah. So those are the general economic threats, environmental threats. With nutrients, nutrients equal algae equal jellyfish. Jellyfish are a problem that you will face if this goes ahead. You will certainly face the filamentous algae that we've got. The problem is then that salps will proliferate. They love to feed on algae. A lot of algae has toxic neurotoxins and other toxins, so these salps become little toxic bullets. The jellyfish also bloom and compete for space with natural species. Jellyfish also coat the gills of the fish, so and really choke them, basically sting them to death. Then they also outcompete for settling space. So more and more we are set. That is a bloom, chockers of jellyfish. Interestingly, in the Falklands, you have the 3 species of salp and jellyfish, that we find we have problems with when there's an algal bloom resulting from the farms. So we shared another thing in common, not only our island mindset. With regards to nutrients and sedimentation equal kelp loss, and you saw the smothering. For you, that is really important. That was important to us as well. We've lost 95% of our kelp, and it's now registered by the Australian government as a threatened ecological community. I'm not suggesting that is only to do with the nutrients from the farm, because we have climate change as well that we had to deal with, and kelp doesn't like boiling waters. So it's a twofold threat to the kelp. We've lost extensive kelp beds and forests. For you, your impact on kelp is such a huge risk. I had a look at a report done into the ecological services, the valuation of your kelp in the Falkland Islands, and it was valued at 2.7 billion pounds in ecological services, things like the sequestration of carbon or provision of creches for species of commercial concern. So the 6 species of commercial interest spawn, feed and reside within the kelp. Different species at different times, including Loligo. In addition to direct impacts on the commercially species of interest, we have impacts on settlement for non-commercial species that feed up that food web. So it's a bit of a double whammy in that regards. So I just want to clarify the rhetoric that we're getting in Tasmania, that Tasmania uses best practice. I've got an asterisk there, because that is true with regards to feed technology. So best practice in terms of growing fish as fat and as fast as possible. So can we grow salmon in Tasmania? Absolutely. We've got the most amazing feed rooms. And that's the technology that will be brought here. You'll have 1 to 2 people sitting in a room in Stanley feeding the fish by remote control. Don't have it in your mind that you have dozens of people running around on boats feeding fish. It happens from a central control room. So, world's best practice? No. We've shown you the harm. That it's the state's largest employer and contributes massively to our GDP? No. Less than 1%, no return on investment, it costs us money. That salmon company is a responsible corporate citizen. Oh, it's just the same thing again. I'll show you why they're not in a second. That salmon is a certified product. Now, to be clear, you would have known MSC certification for your wild fish. There's also ASC for aquaculture. In 2018, in response to Macquarie Harbour, that was stripped from those operators. And World Wildlife Fund, that created the ASC certification program in partnership, walked away from underwriting Tasmanian salmon. And I had a meeting with them to understand why while I was on the panel, because again, it's incumbent on me to get informed. And they told me they couldn't risk their brand on underwriting open pen salmon anymore. So they walked away. And lastly, that Tasmania is disease-free. We are just at the end of a mass mortality event, a viral outbreak of Pisco-rickettsia salmonus, which is a bacteria that's in Chile. Now, I am told it's a slightly different one than they have in Chile. I don't know. But we've lost 10,000 tonnes of salmon in recent months and just recovering from that. So, but this is a little snippet from our Tasmanian officers of the Coordinator General. They're the people who like to encourage investment in Tasmania. They market us internationally. They tell the world that we exceed standards relating to the environment. And they tell the world that we're disease-free. That is untrue. I would be very interested if you go down the road, and I know a little fact-finding mission to the Faroes was undertaken, and that's great. And I've been on these fact-finding missions, and I've been out on the boats, and I've seen the glossy brochures. So I'd just be interested, when I was taken out on the Tasmanian farms in a ministerial advisory capacity, I was given this story, and at first I went, oh, that's brilliant. It's so good, it's so unique. It's great to see the guys with jobs. Only to find during my due diligence this degradation of my confidence in the industry. So I would just say, take that with a grain of salt. Think carefully who's given you that information upon which you will place your future. This is our recent situation that I mentioned briefly. So it started a few months ago. In the summer period, it's warmer. You're more likely to get algal growth than we do every summer. The algal blooms come. They trail off a little bit during the winter and then they come again. So we've had a red tide, that's in the docks in Hobart where I live. Blooms of jellyfish. And this is pieces of fish, flesh, and fish oil washed up on our beaches. That's diseased fish that have died in cages and then broken apart because the farm workers are so overwhelmed with the mortalities they literally can't get them out fast enough. So the fish sit in there getting worse and worse and manky, and then eventually broken up when they're moved. So that's what we've been faced with. EPA are dealing with the investigation and dealing with the recovery from that. But again, that's our taxpayers' money going to deal with something that we didn't do. Globally, so there's the Falklands down there, you will see salmon farming is not possible in that yellow band in the middle. Water's simply too warm. But everywhere else, industries have been set up. Faroes is a little bit of a closed shop because the majority of people in the Faroes actually work in that industry. There's very few people who don't. If they don't, they support it or it's feeding their families. So you get very little truth out of it. I would say that there is a seafood guide coming out of the US where a lot of their product goes that has found 47% of cages in the Faroes. Under those cages, the seabed is either in poor condition or very poor condition. So that's not great. Everywhere else, not wanted, phasing out, not wanted, not wanted, not wanted by the wild fishermen, the salmon fishery. Don't know anything about Russia, but that's not unusual. Tasmania, we don't want you, thank you, it's time to go. And Chile, you know, it's obviously a different country, a different economy, and but there is growing concern there as well. They have massive biosecurity issues there. So everywhere they go, marauding around the world, pandering their wares, showing you the dream of salmon, it turns into a nightmare very quickly. And you might not see it in year 1 or 2, but year 3 to 5, you go, why is El Oligo fishery crashed? Why aren't we catching this fish or that fish? That it'll slowly creep up on you until you turn around one day, like we did, and go, oh my God, we've made a step change into a world that we never intended to be in. And I am nearly finished, and then we'll have some question time. The reason why we have the situation we're in is not necessarily the operation itself, it's the operators. So I work in, like I said, mining, minerals processing, go on to smelters, high impact areas. I have never had them try to hide information from me, lie to me, lobby government, so that, I mean, they do lobby sometimes, but to the extent that the salmon industry lobbies. So the playbook that they run by, and this is the same, you could take Tasmania out of everything I've said and slot in any other place they farm, and you will find this story the same. They won't give you information, they'll say it's commercial in confidence. So we end up not knowing how they're performing. We end up not knowing how much money they're making off our public waterways. They greenwash or deny the harm, even though we can see it. You don't actually have to be a scientist to know when things are wrong. You live here, it's your environment. You will soon know the water quality is changing. First off, there'll be an opaqueness to it. Then there'll be more stuff floating through it, debris of algae. And you know that that's wrong. They silence opposers. They missed one. This one bothers me. They write community members that are simply concerned about their environment and sometimes concerned about their business, their fishing business, their ecotourism business. They want to ask questions, they want answers to those reasonable questions, but they're written off as Greens, activists and anti-everything. It's the same people, they always say no to everything. We have fishermen so upset, we've had one stand himself up as an independent for Parliament and he got in. Because he's directly trashing his business and our brand. They discredit the inconvenient science or they go and buy some other science to give it a more convenient answer. Political lobbying like you would not believe. Donations, it's unbelievable. They stand candidates up or encourage the selection of candidates that are pro-salmon. What that's meant is over time, we have a two-party system, that we have a completely pro-salmon sitting government and opposition, both at the state and federal level. So we don't feel listened to anymore. They use legislation as a weapon, and they litigate. We have had salmon operators threaten litigation to get leases, and then when they're offered, we've even had the EPA taken to court by the salmon industry. What that does over time is it degrades their confidence and it puts them in the position where they don't feel like they can speak out, act strongly, regulate strongly, because they know they're going to get smashed down by the political lobbying and their boss, the minister. So you end up with this degradation of standards, even though you've got good people in the EPA whose hearts are breaking. And I used to sit on their board, I know. And they litigate. So one thing I didn't tell you at the beginning was in 2022 when the MLAs made the decision to make an early no, and I understand the administrative reasons why we are where we are, and I know, believe me, I've heard it all week about why we're here in this court-ordered consultation, let's call it. However, 2022, the early no, that decision reverberated around the world. So those of us that have been trying to get these operators out of our pristine waters, out of our states and countries, were just amazed. Oh, have you seen what the Falklands have done? Isn't that amazing leadership, amazing foresight? Now, obviously, we didn't know the flaw in the way that was done, but the decision was right. And we were so buoyed by that. If they can do it, and they're so much smaller than us, but if they can do it, we can do it. So we were really pleased. Everybody was talking about the Falklands, and you probably don't know that. Then, when they slapped you with a lawsuit to make you go back and follow due process and have a consultation period, that's when the playbook started. And I thought, oh, there it is, started already. They're not even there, and yet they've picked one of the tunes that they sing, and they've taken you to court, and they've won. So now everybody's nervous. Now it divides communities. It puts wedges between neighbours when these things happen. And that is what they do. That is how they chip away at you until you turn around and you find that your state has been irreparably polluted. So I don't find that fair. Lastly, I'm just going to bust a few myths. A myth for you is that, I've heard it this week, oh, if we just do a small trial, that'll tell us whether it has an impact or not. A small trial is not 50,000 tonnes. You won't see those impacts that we showed you at 5 or 10,000 tonne trial. You will not see it unless it's all in the one place. And you'll go along thinking, well, I don't know what that woman was saying. 50,000 tonnes, the equivalent sewage discharge of 2 million people, is not a small industrial operation. That is huge. So that is a myth that you can just have a small trial and it will inform a 50,000 tonne industry. That open pen farming can be sustainable. That is something I've heard this week. No, the open pen must have water flowing through it. There's no other industry that gets away with this. No other industry. They discharge massive loads of nutrient waste untreated, and as I said, it would be front page news. So that's a myth. But we could capture it. I've heard twice this week people say, well, we could capture that, the waste. I would say to you, yeah, people have had a go at that. And you can put some sleeve things on the bottom of the cages. That is for smooth water only. And I have seen no smooth water this week. So it doesn't work in Tasmania, and we're not as rough as you in most places. It might work in a mill pond fjord. Even if it did work, that's 15% of that nutrient waste is as a solid waste. 85% is dissolved in the water, so you can't capture that. So that is a myth. One last myth is that that we can control it. Yes, Tasmania's obviously done it wrong, poorly, and we'll write legislation. We will make them. We will make them be better in the Falklands. We can do it. Now, I love people who go, not for me to say. I would say to you that all around the world we have the same issues. 88, I think, percent non-compliance is in Norway, as reported by the EPA, who simply are swamped by the regulatory burden of this industry. They can't keep up. And Norway's held up as the shining light. Well, most of your operators are non-compliant with their licences, so I don't know, I'm not counting those as regulatable. We're first world, large, mature and smart countries, just the same as you. We can't do it. I would wish you all the best with that, but nobody else has been able to beat that playbook that I showed you. Does anybody have any other myths they would like dispelled? I know it's a big room and people sometimes don't want to.
One of the things that they're losing is this idea of organic salmon farming. And organic salmon farming sounds so good because I hear the word organic and I think, oh, that's good.
I know.
And I'm really worried that people, when they tick their boxes, are going to say, oh yeah, I think organic salmon farming is okay.
Yeah, look, I don't know where this term organic salmon farming comes from when I know the extent of chemical use and the antifoulants that are used at times. Sometimes you can do it mechanically, but sometimes they use antifoulants. So we've got chemicals for biosecurity washing, we've got antifoulants at times, we've got antibiotics. I don't know what organic certifying body says that's okay, but maybe they have one on their books that says, yeah, that's organic.
Is there any examples of this anywhere?
No.
So there's no organic salmon farming happening anywhere else?
Not that I've seen, and I'm not hearing, because you can't with the open pen component. If they want to bring it on land, absolutely I say, yeah, maybe have a go. But those options that have been put forward are not for on-land salmon farming grow out. You've got, actually I'll put them up, let's go through them. You've got 1, no salmon farming on the Falkland. If you don't accept the nutrient discharges, that's probably, this is my view. I want to be very clear about this. This has nothing to do with anybody I've spoken to, nor Salmon Free Falklands. This is my assessment. Option 1 is the only option to take if you don't accept the nutrient discharge, the chemicals and so forth. Options 2 and 3, look, I'm sorry, but I'm not in a position, I guess nor are you yet, to understand what those mean until we see the carrying capacity. And I don't know the extent to which that's being done well or otherwise. Generally, to do a decent biogeochemical model to underpin the carrying capacity takes some years, and I'm not sure that that's been worked on for the last 3 or 4 years. I don't know. And for organic, I can't make a call on that, but it's not defined, and with the issues I've outlined, I don't know what that even means. For me, options 2, 3 and 4 are still accepting open pen salmon farming, and that is the only choice you have to think about. Do you want no open pen salmon farming, or do you want open pen salmon farming? Now, it is okay to say option 1, no, but please come back and knock on our door. We are open for business, and we'd love to talk to you about on-land salmon farming, or maybe any other aquaculture pursuits you'd like to invest. We are here for you. But this one, no. That'll be up to you, obviously. And that's the point I want to leave on. I'm happy to take questions. If you're happy with that, then your challenge is to pick from options 2, 3 or 4. If you are not happy with that, then you only really have one option, and that's up to you. And that's all. So, yeah, was there any other myths or questions anybody wanted to ask?
One question I was going to ask you, you were saying earlier on about how you was trying to get to best practice in Tasmania. Even if you got the best practice, would that be good enough?
When I said I was aiming for best practice, what I was trying to get through on the panel was I wanted to, under their licences, force operators to give their transition to land plan and their business case to do it. So I wanted to force them to start thinking about the end game needed to be, come on, you need to get out of the water. If it's anything other than that, I'd say no, there is no best practice. We're already pretty much at best practice because it is about minimising the amount of feed waste, and that's done very, very well. Having said that, I did calculate if a 50,000 tonne industry for the Falklands would end up with 900 tonne of uneaten food on the bottom of your waterways. But yeah, so it's on land or nothing for me, but absolutely on land is sustainable. Industry will say it's not economic and not possible, but a couple of years ago, it's a different species, so bear with me, I audited Australia's largest barramundi farm. Production ponds, set of production ponds, its matching set of wetlands through which the water reticulates and naturally cleans through reeds and so forth that are planted. It's a created wetland. And the only thing they do is top the ponds up because the water will eventually evaporate, particularly in the Northern Territory where this was. They make an awful lot of money. And I say good on you because I like good economies. I like money. But they make it without harm to their environment. And they wanted me to come up and see was there anything about them that they could do better across their whole organisation. So they let me see from stocking to harvest whether or not there was anything that, in their words, if an activist or a journalist got hold of, that they could, that we would be on the front page of the paper. They were very concerned about brand. And I only found minor things which they addressed straight away, but they also asked me to hold community meetings like this. And to get, what do you think of the farm? It's really huge, visible from space. What do you think of the farm? How do you think they're performing? Is there anything they could do better? Company wasn't there, so people could speak freely. So I did that for 3 nights, and at the end I thought, I couldn't get anybody to say anything bad about them. And it was a completely free space to do so. It's amazing. Whereas you'll see a film with us just absolutely not enjoying our time with the salmon industry. Here they are, the local environment, even the environment group, the activists, they're not on our radar. As long as they keep complying with their licence, yeah, we're happy with them. Amazing. So, like on land is the answer to that.
What do they do with the waste, the dead salmon? How do they dispose of them?
Multiple ways, and it depends how dead they are. So there's degrees of death. A fresh mortality can be put to compost, and it doesn't ruin the composting recipe. If it's at all rancid, it needs to be ensiled, or it needs to go to deep burial, or it needs to go to what they call shallow burial, which I do not agree with, so I'm not even going to explain it. So it's either going to a landfill for deep burial or ensiled.
Well, we watched a documentary in Scotland. They set up a processing
Yes.
to process the waste.
Yes.
And not one fish went through it.
Oh, yeah. Hey, we've got one of those.
And it just showed you a big shovel, shoveling up and tipping them in a hole.
Yeah. And there's a massive amount of greenhouse gas emissions from the slow decay of them, so it's very bad. Yeah, interesting. I didn't know that about Scotland. Yeah, I haven't seen that one.
One thing that came up in one of the presentations that they gave was about sea lice explosions. I don't know actually what they have in Tasmania with regards to it. More definitely a problem in the Northern Hemisphere.
Yeah.
And they said they were going to use lasers to do it. And obviously we don't have a wrasse fishery or anything here. They'd have to import wrasse, which would be another invasive, etc. Have you heard of any success with lasers being used for parasitic control?
Yeah, and this one I'm going to have to pass on because we actually don't have sea lice, or salmon lice, it's a particular species, in Tasmania. So we yet to have to deal with it. So I'm not really that over it. I have had a look into it and I can see people trying to use wrasse, but it's been one of the largest issues facing salmon globally. I know they have issues in Chile, but yeah, I can't answer that.
Mainly with the Atlantic salmon.
Yeah, but that's what's proposed for here. Yeah. And I mean, the lice do attach to specifically a salmon, so yeah. And they're really nasty. So sorry I can't answer. It's not outside my experience.
You were talking about the different environmental impacts, but there's no mention about entanglement or like seals and things moving location. Has that happened in Tasmania?
Yeah, actually, that's a really good point. I probably should put it on there. Yeah, we have, we're very similar in that we have seals and a lot of shore birds and things. We have huge issues with seals and salmon farms. So they are very attracted to escaped fish and the nutrients that draw other things. In the old days, back in the day, they would shoot them, then they started to relocate them. Now they use explosive deterrent devices. So they use hundreds and hundreds of seal, they call them crackers, seal crackers a year. So that's how they deal with them. The fortress cages that I see as the option being promoted here is a Tasmanian thing, fortress cages. They are fully netted to keep seals and birds out. It's not 100% because seals are really, poorly behaved animals. They're really cute, but they're naughty. So they do break in at times. I would say about the fortress cages, I think the name is deceiving. You think of it as a steel fortress, but I was looking the other day when I sat in the office down on the waterfront and looking at the wind whipping through Stanley Harbour, and I'm thinking, oh my God, there's no way these cages are going to stand up against that, because they're not actually made for rough water. They're good, reasonable with swell, but that rough, choppy stuff. So I'm a bit worried about marine debris for you and the breaking up of cages. So, yeah.
Yeah, we've got enough marine fishing nets and so on. around.
Yeah, right. Yeah. There's enough in our oceans, so we don't need more plastic.
What is the water depth underneath of the cages in average
Uh,
in Tasmania?
In average, we've got it's a bit hard for an average because we have a really big range. Technically, under the standard, at lowest tide, the minimum you can have is 2 metre clearance between the seabed and the bottom of the cage. Now that is incredibly small, and nobody actually operates that close. It's just an absolute minimum to deal with that very, very low tide. But look, it could be anywhere from 40 metres to 15 metres. They're farming in all different bays. So
basically the cages are placed in places where it's less than 50 metres in average, yeah? The depth.
I would say
and
that's about
like
true.
From the surface into the...
Yeah, generally we have them in waters that are about that.
Yeah,
but there's quite a big range.
Yeah, the reason why I'm asking is because Loligo is actually spawning in the shallow waters in general, and that's why I'm asking.
Yeah, well, it is a good point. And my really main concerns twofold for Loligo are the damage to kelp and the flow-on effects of that, and the sedimentation. So the release of particulates and nutrients onto sediments, therefore smothering Loligo breeding sites. So those are my concerns. Yeah.
I've got a couple of questions I noted down that link to that. When you brought the map up of Tasmania, although the detail we couldn't really see where we were, am I wrong to assume that none of those mussel farms or oyster farms are anywhere near the salmon farms, because surely they'd be poisoned?
They are, and they are.
Yeah. Okay.
So it's not science that I can release to you because it hasn't been published yet. But of late, oyster growers are outraged. One in particular have gone bankrupt. The work that's been done on water quality and the algae in the water near the farms, what the scientists have managed to do is isolate the compound, so the algae gives off a compound. At 1% concentration, that compound is sublethal to oysters but does kill a few after an hour. At 5%, within an hour, all oysters have died. So that's quite a toxic compound coming from the algae, which is there because of the nutrients. So you can see it going back down from the farms, from the salmon farms. So yeah, they're upset.
And sorry, my last point, I don't mean to hog on.
No.
Like, the last point is about really kelp, because it's so important to the coastal photography around here. But in your observations in Tasmania, I understand about the sea temperature changes around there, which are causing a lot of the die-offs and that. But have you got examples of areas that had relatively healthy kelp beds that ended up being subjected to areas that had been salmon farmed, and you saw the die-off directly because of the salmon farms and not attributable to the increase in the sea level?
And because the two are happening at the same time, it's hard to tease the two issues apart. So if I were designing an experiment, I'm going to expose you to one or the other, and then I can see, and then in combination, we've got warm marine heat wave conditions and nutrients at the same time. So again, I can't really answer that because we have seen die-off to 95%. We do have both extreme nutrients and heat. The contribution of those two factors to the die-off, I couldn't answer. So,
what is the sea temperature change that you've had?
We're getting summer temperatures of over 20 degrees. So that's getting very, very warm. Sea temperatures. Yeah, it's not very refreshing.
Roughly how many cages do they have in Tasmania?
Oh, that's a really good question because it's very...
No one knows.
Yeah. Well, there's one independent scientist, and she does know. If she was here, she'd be able to answer that. You have to get on Google Earth and literally count them because the data is again commercial in confidence. So the data is aggregated for the whole state. So I could tell you the tonnes of production for the whole state, and I could tell you the amount of feed and metrics like that, but I can't tell you where indeed that's happening. So, yeah.
You mentioned staffing levels for the industry. What would it look like for a government if they had to staff something like this? What increases would they be expecting?
Like if you have to write regulation and policy, you've got some years of work, and we have a policy department that's quite large. You said somebody from policy. Yeah, look, again, it's cloak and dagger, and I tried to get the EPA's salmon branch numbers. I can tell you there's 113 EPA staff, our independent regulator, but nobody will tell me how many of them are dedicated to salmon. So I anticipated that question, but I can't really answer it well. All I know is it's quite a lot of regulatory effort and policy writing to even get to the point where you have the standards in place, and then the difficult thing is you'll run into the playbook. So that's sort of an answer.
I have a question about politics.
Yeah.
You said that all of your opposition and governmental parties were all, let's say, influenced somewhat by the salmon industry, both statewide and federal.
Yes.
Now, was the federal government already pro-salmon before Tasmania came along, or did it spread from one to the other, or did it happen both at the same time?
No, it spread from one to the other. So we only have salmon farming in Tasmania, and because that government is so captured and influenced, it's both from the political parties in Tasmania informing their federal counterparts, but mostly it's the lobbyists working for the industry going up to Canberra and lobbying to get the attention.
So on the back of that, so it's a lobbying issue.
Yeah.
What should we be watching? What should we be watching for? What should our MLAs be watching for? I guess they're not clever at doing this. What are the little red flags that we as a community should be going, hold on, we need to put it up and make you accountable for this?
You've already got a red flag. You've got the objection, the litigation on your no kicked in.
That's not turning individual MLAs, or
no. But that's the red flag for turning individual MLAs. Look, I'm not sure. I mean, you have to have an independent regulator. You have to have governance. That means nobody can be, subjected to any risk of corruption. I know. Interesting faces being made. Look, it's a really. I don't know that I can answer that either because it's you will work in a particular Falkland Islands way. I certainly know for Tasmania, politically, the only thing we've been able to do is stand candidates up, independent candidates. So we've got one fisherman who's now in Parliament. We had one person who is heading up the community group who thought, no, I'll stand for federal Parliament. And he got 41,000 votes, and the last meeting we had before the recent election, we had 6,000 people. That's how upset people are. So that's all we can do, really.
So having everyone here standing as an independent should actually help.
Yeah, it should theoretically, as long as, what I would say is, please don't listen to the rhetoric from the glossy brochures that you've been shown. Please understand that you will 100% face the massive nutrient loads that I have described to you, and there's no way to policy write your way around that. That is done under licence, and there's no way to get around it. So that's why I would encourage MLAs to make decisions that you feel comfortable with, but please don't make them on the back of the glossy brochure, because our lived experience has been horrific. And I do find it hard to watch Paradise Lost, because that is my home, and it's trashed.
If Tasmania now have a referendum or a vote, what percentage of the population do you think would say, if we went back, we would have said no?
Yeah.
We don't want it anymore.
Yeah. Nobody's doing a referendum, obviously, and we're a state, so we do referendums as a whole country. The community groups have done surveys, and the last survey, I can't remember how long ago, was over 70% of people were against the farms. So that's showing you a big swing from where we were, 30 years ago, where we all loved the farms. We thought they were great before the harm set in.
Is there still any consultation, for major expansion? Was that publicly consulted, and does the government take that into account? Because we do a lot of consultations, but how often that is taken into account can be debatable.
Yeah, it's a really good question. So the laws provide for public participation in these decisions. So while I was on the panel, that massive expansion was put out for public comment. We received hundreds and hundreds of representation, which we as a panel, well, not everybody went through them, but I went through every single one of those hundreds of representation. And then we had 3 days of public hearings. You must, under law, offer the opportunity for people to come and tell you face-to-face their thoughts. So I listened to public submissions for 3 days, and it was horrific. It's people like you saw on the video that are totally agreed, whose lives are being interrupted on the daily. Unfortunately, it was early in my time on the panel, and I started to realise I might be in the wrong place. I might not be quite as big a sycophant as was required to sit on that panel. Because another panel member said to me in the break, this is very hard to listen to, and of course we can't take any of it into account in our decision making. So, and I said, well, I am. Why did they come if we're not to take it into account? And he said that, well, we didn't invite them. And we didn't invite them to come and make submissions, the law made us. That's the only answer I have, is my story, which is consultation is done because the law requires it. Is it listened to? Absolutely not. It's a fake ticker box exercise in Tasmania. So I hope you do it better here.
Where have people had success? Community groups, have there been success stories?
Yeah.
Washington State?
Yeah. No, in Tasmania we are yet to get a cage taken out. However, I count the recent election, and I count 6,000 people at a meeting being supportive as a success. I count a candidate getting 41,000 votes as a success. I think we are on the way to when we can start to see cages come out, but we're not yet there yet. And it is a hard slog to fight this industry because they are so powerful.
If it stopped, how long would it take to clean up that harbour? How many years do you reckon that would recover?
More years than we have. Macquarie Harbour is an interesting environmental beast because it's very deep, it's quite still, and it's a very dark, naturally tannin-stained waterway. That is, not only was it already filled with quite a lot of leaf litter and things from the rivers that feed it, so you've already got a large biological oxygen demand down there. Now we've coated it all in the salmon, so basically we've filled the bottom of that harbour with compost, and it is going to take a really long time for that to switch. With regards to the Maugean skate, I unfortunately think it is threatened to the point of extinction, and we will never recover that species. So
when did Tasmania's industry begin, and when did you begin to notice the degradation?
yeah, so it started as the tiny little bespoke industry in 1986. And really, it was only once you see those farms of 4, 5, 10 hens that people are starting to see the impacts. So if I put a farm in today, it'd probably take maybe a year to 2 years to start to see impacts. We have our most recent new farm site, which doesn't have many cages, has been in 5 years. And the last 2 years of statutory monitoring, they've been unable to collect the samples because the areas are that choked up with algae, and that's within 5 years.
They'd be pretty reluctant to let anybody near them places, aren't they?
Oh yeah, not allowed in. No, so you can't run your boat through. It's all completely restricted zone.
Well policed.
Oh, what's that?
It's well policed.
Well policed.
Who pays for the policing? I mean, if you do go within 200 metres of a marine farm,
who
prosecutes you basically? Is that the poor old taxpayer has to pay for that?
Yeah, we don't actually we have marine police out there, but it's the farm people themselves that manage access and shoo you away.
A question earlier.
Oh, sorry, yeah.
If in best case scenario everyone voted for option 1 in the consultation, would that actually stop the salmon farming from happening?
And that depends on the, in my view, that depends on the quality of the no you give. So you've got to give no with reasons. You will follow through due process, which is fair and right, I guess. And then you have to give your reasons why, and have those reasonably founded in. You can't just say we don't want it for no reason. But because of the playbook, what's that?
Why not?
Oh yeah, no, I totally agree with you. I think you should just be. It's your island. They're your waterways, and you said no. Well, your MLA said no on your behalf, and that should have been good enough for that industry. But because of the playbook, they take you to court, and now you have to play this game of pretend and spend both taxpayers' money, civil servant time and money to make a decent case as to why you're saying no. I totally agree. They should have just walked away graciously. Have some integrity, guys.
Perhaps you better send us some wallabies.
Oh yeah. yeah.
Oh, trees.
So there's a question up the back.
Yeah, thanks very much. We talked a little bit, somebody had asked a question about the capacity of the government to do policy work and things like that. And at the beginning you showed a slide of all different legislation and regulation there. In your view, I mean, looking at the proposals for Falklands, they're quite remote areas.
Yep.
And as far as I could see on the internet, quite a lot of self-reporting goes on within the industry.
Correct.
What would be your view of a really well-policed and well-regulated government operation here, and what sort of infrastructure and people you need to be able to run that?
You'll need a lot of people, and you'll need some very gutsy people to stand up. I don't know how to do it better, because we do have decent people in Tasmania in the regulatory office. We have good scientists, and we can't answer that question. We can't make them comply. We can't make them be transparent about their production data because of the playbook and commercial in confidence. So, you know, I'd love to find an answer to that question, but I don't have it for our state, and I can hardly offer it for your country. I'm sorry. A lot of things I'm not answering. There's another question.
Oh, hi. Thank you for an excellent talk. I've got a few questions. In New Zealand recently, they had mass mortality with the salmon farming that was so bad that they were dumping it in landfill and they couldn't keep up with it. And they didn't know what to do, were ringing people all around the world, and decided that it was because it was too shallow and warm, and obviously there's climate change down there as well. So the solution, in inverted commas, was to grant lots more deeper water permits.
Yeah.
So question one is your opinion on that, and question two is why is it not possible to have regulations that the people who own the farms pay for all the environmental destruction and clean-up?
Yeah. So in terms of question one, deep water farming, that would be great. However, the infrastructure, the cages, they are not, it's very, very hard to farm in rough waters, and it's also a lot more expensive because you're running service boats back and forth. So the cost model changes and it's much, much harder to do. So people aren't doing deep water farming, even though they might say, like in Tasmania, they say, we're going offshore. That offshore is in a place called Storm Bay. It's a bay. So don't call it offshore, that's just fake news. So it really is more difficult and more expensive to do that, which is why it's a bit of a furphy. With regards to the regulation and the contribution, as in like polluter pays, absolutely you could put in a system that did pay for that regulatory effort, obviously, because you're starting from scratch. However, I would put it to you that you have to think about whether you accept this before you even think about writing policy to control it. If you accept that, absolutely, you know, I don't think anybody can help you for what's coming for you if you do accept that. But I wouldn't even be thinking about regulatory effort and could it be done better. Our experience is no. People here tell me, you know, maybe it's a Falklands thing, that they can do it. We can prevail against these monsters. Yeah, that's right.
They can't even build a port.
I was
saying, we've been to look at the rubbish houses and the management of our waste that we have.
Yeah. So, and obviously there's a number of local issues that I can't get involved in. But yeah, I would say to you, no. Why would you entertain spending effort and money, your money, on building a system to manage that? Because that's still going to happen. And certainly in Tasmania, that happens under permit.
I just wondered what the engagement was with younger people in Tasmania, and especially like school children. Are you allowed to talk openly or freely, or do you have to give a balanced opinion about the salmon farming?
Yeah, it's funny because I mean, children are sponges and they generally take their opinions from their family. So we're finding a lot of interest in environmental issues and certainly climate change as well. So younger people are more engaged than they ever have been before. I did meet a young girl, she was about 7 or 8, and she lived in one of the strongholds, one of the farm areas where the neighbours, there's a few farm workers live there, and the kids go to the local school. She did a presentation on how much she hates the farms and why they need to go because of the environmental harm, and did a presentation for her schoolmates. So my opinion is they are engaged, they do talk openly, and with the growing unhappiness of the parents, we see that come through from the school children. Incidentally, the independent candidate that stood, he didn't quite make it. He was so popular with young voters, which I thought was amazing. He was being treated like a rock star. So.
Yeah, I'm just thinking, because like if we trash it, the environment, that's what we're leaving for our children.
Yeah. And one of the United Nations principles of sustainability is generational equity. So we have no right to hand over the world in any worse state than we got it to the next generation. So you know, this is not that, and so that's why I don't count it as sustainable.
Why do you think that Norwegians want to come here? Have they ruined theirs that bad that it's got to the point where it's going to have to close?
It's pretty bad. Over 80% of farms aren't compliant. They've lost a lot of their wild salmon. The greatest issue facing salmon, open pen salmon farming globally is the access to water. So they've got over about 1.2 million tonne of production here in Norway. So they're kind of running out of water. They need to go around the world and find places like this. And I look at the Falklands as a map and I go, oh, that's ripe for the picking. That is a great place to farm salmon.
You got to say what water?
What's that?
What water? Fresh or salt?
Salt.
Clean. We've had the same problem here. In the 1950s, they introduced trout.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just devastated the rivers.
Yeah.
There's no little creepy crawlers left. There's no zebra trout left for a few places in the Falklands. And now we're talking, and the poor old Terry there's a keen fisherman.
Again.
They just ruined the place.
Yeah, and salmon are another highly voracious, carnivorous predator, very high up, top water predator, so when they escape, yeah, they can do some damage. Like trout.
Just at the end of the season this year, go to Bear Harbour, the little creek there.
Yeah.
The Port Ops people caught 2 5-pound salmon there.
Oh.
There's more and more salmon. 2 5-pound salmon.
From Chile.
From Chile. Unbelievable.
How often would these breakouts of cages happen? Like, is it a regular thing? Or?
After storm, generally it's storm times. Yeah, so after a Oh no, yeah. Yeah, so when it's rough and windy, they break up.
You've answered the question, thank you.
Yeah. But thank you for the question.
Sorry, you were talking about, just a couple of minutes ago, about the Norwegian and the Scandinavian salmon farm.
Yeah.
Do we know anything about the Danish company that is going to be 75% of a very erroneously named Unity Marie?
75.1.
Is it a known company? Does it have
Not
a
to
known
me.
track record?
Would anybody else like to answer that? Does anybody else know the answer to that? I don't know.
You don't know.
I think it's actually a Norwegian company, isn't it?
No, Danish.
I think the information was in the original release a few years ago. Yeah. So if anybody would track that down online and find that information.
And what I'd say, and one thing I've said consistently from my time on the panel right through to now, and every time I speak publicly in Tasmania, you will never hear me name one of those companies. Because I actually don't care who's farming. I do not care. I don't care if it's Unity, I don't care if it's anybody else. Don't do that. And don't take us to court when we tell you no. So, you know, it doesn't really matter. It doesn't matter.
I just ask, you know how you talk about this playbook and you give all these things that they do, and you've given us examples and everything else.
Yeah.
What would your answer back to be, people? Because I know that when I hear someone say, oh, there's a playbook and it's a conspiracy.
Yeah.
So what do you say, how would you answer back to people who would say that's just a conspiracy?
Yeah, I would say that, like I said in the beginning, this is the only time in my very long career that I have seen such appalling behaviour, such appalling levels of denial of the harm that's being caused, and such an unwillingness to recognise and do something about the threat they're posing. So because I personally have seen huge environmental issues that have helped my clients to solve, I know we can do better. And it takes planning and integrity by those businesses, and it takes working together and foresight and planning. And I see this in my client base, and I really enjoy helping people, even with really big pollution issues, or they've broken the law accidentally even sometimes, and I come in and I help them. And we declare the dilemma and we work together. This is cloak and dagger, this is hidden, and that's my issue. I could not get anything other than you need to trust us. Stop asking for stuff, stop asking for proof, you just need to trust us. So it is absolutely true that this playbook exists. I haven't Googled that from anywhere else. That is the things I have witnessed. So, you know, I'd love it not to be true. I'd love all of this not to be true. It just is. And I'm highly pragmatic. I'm not a conspiracy theorist, you know. Anything else?
Sorry, just one. Aside from the environmental impacts, which we understand are awful, the sort of selling point of the Falklands to tourists is where nature is still in charge. That will be gone. Have you in Tasmania seen a negative impact from visitors? Have they voiced their concerns? Because obviously the residents have, but visitors as well?
Yeah. It's a funny thing, and you'll probably have the same here, because Tasmania's reasonably out of the way. People have, like the Falklands, people have it on there to do this. And when they eventually get there, I remember catching a tourist flight down into the southwest of Tassie, and we'd just been given it as a present. I wouldn't normally tour in my own state. Caught this tourist flight down, and some of the other passengers going, "Oh my God, like there's so many farms." And from every farm you can see a little emanating slick of oil from the feed. So it's not a great look. So all I heard was it's not great. What that does to non-return tourism, I'm not sure, but certainly we believe that it does not match at all with how we're trying to market ourselves and how we believe we are clean and green and pristine. Please come visit us and spend your money, and we'll show you how beautiful we are. This is just jars against that. I would say...
I think it jars at so many other levels as well. When you come on the air bridge, they show you a biosecurity film. You're not allowed to bring in a potato, and yet they're prepared to think about bringing in an invasive species.
Yeah, I had my walking boots checked.
I think that features a Salmon Islands, isn't it? Biosecurity.
Yeah, look, I think it's very jarring because it's clearly not a good practice. What I think is not more, but equally concerning is the threat that this poses to Loligo and other wild fisheries, that you make your largest amount of money off, and you're going to say yes to this and put that at direct threat, and I can't reconcile that. And I guess that's something for you to think about when you're making your decisions, is how you reconcile the risk of your current economic inputs against the risk of what will come for you.
So can I just go to the no of us, of what we've said? And when we say, and these are the reasons, and one reason is, you know, the threat to our ego, and they'll say, well, can you prove that?
Yeah.
Well, we can't.
I think you prove it by using the science you have, which is you know where they settle and spend their time, and you know it's the kelp, and you can find science globally that supports that. And just because you don't have local science or a baseline here does not mean you can't either find information. You do have baseline surveys about where things are spawning and so forth. So yes, it takes a bit of effort to write a decent no case, which is annoying that we have to do that. But I believe you can do it, and I believe you'll be able to pull that together. But you might need some assistance and really work together to do that, or call in reinforcements. And this has nothing to do with Salmon Free Falklands, but I have said when this consultation pack comes, I'm happy to look at it. And if you do end up going through the process and coming up with a no, I'm happy also to look at that and see what we could draw together on building that case for no, because it matters to me that you don't have to live the way we live.
I just want to say that if you have to justify a no vote, you therefore have to justify democracy.
I know.
Absolutely.
And if you have to justify democracy, then it's not democracy.
No, that's right.
So
But you know what will happen if you don't, is they'll come back at you, because that's what they do. And they'll end up lobbying in London. And they'll end up pulling all these levers that are effective elsewhere. And I find it horrific, and I totally agree, and no is no, and it's ours, not yours, but it's a strong industry.
Stubborn lot of
All these ministers have been elected by a yes vote, right?
Yeah.
The others were out through a no vote. So you've got the straight votes.
Yeah, it's easy, isn't it? There's one question.
You said that both government and opposition of the government, you have two parties.
Yes.
Both of them against, pro-salmon farming, yeah?
Yep.
Who is choosing these people into the government? There must be somebody is voting for them.
Yeah.
The population in general is actually saying yes to the whole thing.
Yeah.
So it's only Tasmanian government who is actually, Tasmanian people who are suffering, but this is very little, 500,000 people.
Yeah.
In comparison to millions you have in the whole country, nothing. The amount of money it comes into the economy is huge, and therefore nobody pays attention what Tasmanians are thinking.
Yeah.
Why do you think it's not going to happen to us the same?
I don't know if it will or won't happen to you, but I certainly know from our perspective, we have had the good we're getting independence up, which is the only way out for us. With those two major parties, we run what's called preferences. So if one party doesn't get a vote, normally they won't give it to the opposition because they really don't like each other. But in this case, and now in Tasmania, they preferenced each other, so they were willing to band together with their enemy to stay in power and remain pro-salmon, which makes no sense to any reasonable thinking person in Tasmania when there's no economic return. It's unfathomable and it's disgraceful, and it just goes to the power of the political lobbying and the political donations to both parties. But how that will translate to Falklands, and I just don't know enough about your culture, your
well,
system.
it comes to the previous question about democracy.
Yeah. So, all right.
Okay, so thank you very much, Louise. And just, it is fantastic that you come all this way to help us out. If anyone would like to sign up, their email address on these forms here, we'll try and keep you informed about the upcoming consultation. There's some stickers and some pens to bribe you. Just like to say, please fill in the consultation. Like Louise said, no means no for me, it's the only answer. And just please don't forget, this is really, really important. If we change those waterways out there, we've changed them. There's probably no going back. There's a once in a lifetime chance. Thank you.